The dust from the outlaw's retreat had barely settled when Eliza Edwards lowered her father's shotgun, her hands trembling as violently as her heart. The ranch house behind her, once a symbol of her family's perseverance, now stood riddled with bullet holes, a hollow reminder of everything she had lost. At 26, Eliza had buried her husband, her father, and with them, any hope for her future in Cottonwood Springs, Arizona Territory, 1885. "They'll be back," she whispered to no one, her voice carried away by the merciless desert wind. 3 days had passed since she'd laid Thomas in the hard earth behind the house they'd built together. The fever had taken him too quick for the doctor to ride out from town. 8 months of marriage ended in 3 days of suffering. Before him, her father had succumbed to the same sickness last winter. Now the Lazarus gang, sensing her vulnerability, had come to claim the land her father and husband had died protecting. Eliza dragged herself back into the house, barring the door, though she knew it wouldn't hold if they returned. The water in the basin was tepid as she washed the dust from her face, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes, and her chestnut hair hung limp around her shoulders. She hardly recognized herself. A soft nickering from the barn reminded her that the animals needed tending. Life continued, even when it seemed impossible that it should. She had promised Thomas she would hold on to their dream, but standing alone against the vastness of the territory, against men who would kill for what little she had left, seemed a fool's errand. "I'll leave in the morning," she decided, speaking to the ghost of her husband that lingered in every corner. "Sell what I can in town and take the stage east." The words tasted like surrender, bitter and shameful. Sleep eluded her that night, as it had since Thomas had drawn his final breath beside her. Moonlight filtered through the curtains her mother had sewn years ago, casting patterns across the rough wooden floor. In the distance, a coyote called, the sound mournful and haunting. Like Eliza, it seemed to cry for what was lost. Dawn brought no relief. She packed what she could carry: her mother's silver hairbrush, her father's pocket watch, Thomas's letters, and dressed in her best traveling clothes. The wagon would fetch a fair price in town, enough perhaps for a ticket to St. Louis or Chicago, where she had distant cousins who might take her in. The animals presented a problem. She couldn't take them with her, nor could she leave them to starve. She would have to sell them in town as well, including Shadow, Thomas's prized stallion. The thought of parting with the horse brought fresh tears to her eyes. Shadow was the last living connection to her husband. With a heavy heart, she led the livestock out of the barn, hitching her mare to the wagon. Shadow followed dutifully, as if sensing the gravity of the day. As she secured the last of her belongings, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. Riders approaching fast. Her blood turned cold. The Lazarus gang, returning as promised. She had no time to flee, no chance to reach town before they overtook her. Eliza grabbed the shotgun from the wagon and positioned herself on the porch, determined that if this was to be her last stand, she would not make it easy for them. But as the riders drew closer, she realized there were only two, not the half-dozen outlaws who had threatened her the day before. One rode ahead of the other, and even at a distance, she could tell by the set of his shoulders and the way he handled his horse that this was no outlaw. The lead rider slowed his mount as he approached the property, raising one hand in a gesture of peace. Eliza kept the shotgun raised, unwilling to trust appearances. "That's close enough," she called when they were within earshot. The man reined his horse to a stop, and his companion did the same. "Madam," he called back, his voice deep and steady, "we don't mean any harm. Name's Owen Vance. This here's my brother, Jasper. We're tracking the Lazarus gang." Eliza's grip on the shotgun didn't waver. "What business do you have with them?" Owen Vance removed his hat, revealing hair the color of wheat fields in summer. "U.S. Marshals, madam. We've been after Luther Lazarus and his men for 6 months now, all the way from Texas." Hope flickered in Eliza's chest, but she tamped it down. "I've got nothing but your word on that." The man called Owen reached slowly into his vest and produced a silver badge that caught the morning light. "Would it help if I rode up closer so you could see this proper?" Eliza hesitated, then nodded once, keeping the shotgun at the ready. Owen approached alone, his brother hanging back. As he drew closer, she could see his features more clearly, a strong jawline softened by kind eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore the dust of the trail like a second skin, his clothes faded from sun and wear. He stopped a few paces from the porch and extended the badge. Eliza stepped forward cautiously and examined it. It appeared genuine, the words United States Marshal clearly engraved in the silver. "They were here yesterday," she said finally, lowering the shotgun slightly. "6 of them said they'd be back to claim what's mine." Owen's expression hardened. "Then we're not far behind. Did they say when they'd return?" "They didn't need to. Soon enough to stop me from leaving, I expect." Owen looked past her to the packed wagon. "You're abandoning your home," the question stung, though she knew he hadn't meant it as an accusation. "I'm alone," she said simply. "My husband died last week, my father before him. I can't defend this place by myself." A flicker of sympathy crossed Owen's face. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Edwards. Eliza Edwards, Mrs. Edwards." He replaced his hat, shielding his eyes from the sun. "If you're willing, I'd like to ask for your help. My brother and I have been tracking these men for a long time. If they're planning to return here, it might be our best chance to capture them." "Capture them?" Eliza couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "They'll kill you both." "There are 6 of them, armed to the teeth and mean as rattlesnakes." A ghost of a smile touched Owen's lips. "We've faced worse odds, and we wouldn't be asking you to fight, just to stay at least for another day or two, make it look like you haven't gone anywhere." "You want to use me as bait?" "It wasn't a question. We want to use your situation," Owen corrected. "You'd be safe, we'd make sure of it." Eliza glanced at the packed wagon, then back at the house that had been her home for her entire married life, short as it was. The thought of leaving had felt like failure, like betraying Thomas's memory, but staying meant risking her life on the word of 2 strangers. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked. Owen met her gaze steadily. "You don't. But I give you my word as a marshal and as a man that no harm will come to you while I'm breathing." There was something in his voice, a quiet certainty that made her want to believe him. And what did she have to lose? If she left now, the Lazarus gang would simply take her land. If she stayed and the Marshals failed, she'd be no worse off than if she'd tried to face the outlaws alone. "All right," she said finally. "One day, if they don't show by tomorrow, I'm leaving." Relief washed over Owen's face. "That's fair, thank you, Mrs. Edwards." "Eliza," she corrected. If they were going to risk their lives together, formalities seemed pointless. "Eliza," he repeated, and the way her name sounded in his mouth made something flutter in her chest, something she immediately suppressed. Her husband wasn't even cold in his grave. "You and your brother should come inside," she said, turning toward the house. "I'll make coffee and you can tell me your plan." Jasper Vance rode up as his brother dismounted. He was younger than Owen, with the same wheat-colored hair but sharper features. He nodded politely to Eliza as he swung down from his saddle. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "mighty kind of you to help us." "I haven't helped you yet," Eliza replied, though there was no bite in her words. "Let's see if your plan has any merit first." Inside, the house felt different with the 2 men filling the space. They moved carefully, respectfully, aware they were guests in a home recently touched by grief. Eliza busied herself at the stove, grateful for the simple task of making coffee. It gave her hands something to do besides shake. "You've been tracking these men since Texas?" she asked as she worked. Owen nodded, settling into one of the kitchen chairs. "They robbed a bank in El Paso, killed 3 people, been moving west since, leaving a trail of bodies behind them. Luther Lazarus fancies himself some kind of revolutionary," Jasper added, leaning against the wall near the window. "Claims he's fighting against the railroads and the big cattle companies, but he's nothing but a killer who dresses up his greed in fancy words." "And you think you can take 6 men with just the 2 of you?" Eliza set cups of coffee before them, the rich aroma filling the kitchen. "3, Owen corrected, meeting her eyes over the rim of his cup. "If you count yourself, I told you I won't fight, and I don't expect you to. But we need someone inside the house, someone they can see. They need to believe you're alone and vulnerable." The plan, as Owen outlined it, was simple enough. Eliza would go about her business as if nothing had changed. The Marshals would conceal themselves, one in the barn, one in the root cellar accessible from outside the house. When the Lazarus gang arrived, they would let the outlaws approach the house, thinking Eliza was alone. Then the marshals would emerge and catch them in a crossfire. "It's risky," Eliza said when he finished. "If they see either of you before you're ready or if they decide to shoot first and talk later." "That's why we need your help," Owen said. "You'll be our eyes. When you see them coming, you signal us, a lamp in the east window. That'll give us time to get in position." Eliza looked down at her hands, which had finally stopped trembling. Part of her, the part that had been raised by a frontier father who believed in standing your ground, wanted to help these men bring justice to those who threatened her home. Another part, the widow who had already lost too much, wanted nothing more than to be on the eastbound stage by nightfall. "If I do this," she said slowly, "and if by some miracle we succeed, what happens after? The Lazarus gang isn't the only threat out here. There will be others." Owen set down his coffee cup. "That's a decision for another day, but I promise you this: if we take down Luther Lazarus and his men, word will spread. People will think twice before troubling you. Unless they think a woman alone is easy prey, regardless." A silence fell over the kitchen. Eliza hadn't meant to sound so bitter, but the words had escaped before she could stop them. "You're right," Owen said finally. "It's not fair that you should have to fight to keep what's rightfully yours, but that's the territory for you. Fair, don't enter into it much." Jasper shifted by the window. "Someone's coming," he said sharply. "Single rider from the east." Eliza's heart leapt into her throat. Owen was on his feet in an instant, moving to the window beside his brother. Eliza followed, peering past them at the approaching figure. "It's Doc Miller," she said, recognizing the familiar silhouette of the town physician. "He promised to check back on me after." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Your husband," Owen supplied gently. "We'll make ourselves scarce. Jasper, go to the barn. I'll take the root cellar." "Mrs. Edwards, Eliza, don't mention us unless you're certain he can be trusted." The brothers slipped out the back door as Doc Miller's buggy pulled up in front of the house. Eliza smoothed her skirts and went to greet him, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "Doc," she said as he climbed down from the buggy, "I wasn't expecting you today." Doc Miller was a man in his 60s, with a shock of white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He'd been the physician in Cottonwood Springs for as long as Eliza could remember, had delivered her into the world, in fact. "Thought I'd check on you," he said, taking her hands in his weathered ones. "How are you holding up, child? I'm managing." It wasn't entirely a lie. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" Inside, Doc Miller settled at the kitchen table, his observant eyes taking in the packed bags by the door. "Going somewhere?" Eliza hesitated. Doc Miller had been a friend to her family for years. If anyone in Cottonwood Springs could be trusted, it was him. "I was planning to," she admitted. "The Lazarus gang paid me a visit yesterday, said they'd be back to claim the ranch." Doc's bushy eyebrows drew together in a frown. "Those devils. Sheriff Holden should be out here protecting you." "Sheriff Holden is more interested in protecting the saloon's whiskey supply," Eliza said dryly. "Besides, there's been a change of plans. Some help has arrived." She briefly explained about the Marshals, watching Doc's face carefully for his reaction. Relief washed over his features. "Thank the Lord," he said. "I've heard of these Vance brothers, good men from what people say. Tenacious, too. You believe they can do it?" "Take on the whole gang," Doc sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "If anyone can, it would be them. Owen Vance has a reputation for being methodical, patient. And his brother's one of the fastest guns in the territory, they say." The knowledge that others knew and respected the Marshals eased some of Eliza's doubts. "They want me to stay, to act as bait." "And what do you want, Eliza?" The question caught her off guard. What did she want? Since Thomas's death, she'd been moving through each day like a sleepwalker, focused only on survival. Wants and desires seemed like luxuries she could no longer afford. "I want." She began, then stopped. "I want to not be afraid anymore. I want to honor what Thomas and my father built here. I want to believe there's still something worth fighting for." Doc Miller's eyes softened. "Then I think you have your answer." After Doc left, promising to return the next day with supplies, Eliza signaled to the Marshals that it was safe to come out. They emerged from their hiding places, dust clinging to their clothes. "Doc Miller knows who you are," she told them. "Says you have a reputation." Owen exchanged a glance with his brother. Good or bad, good it seems, he believes you can do this. That makes one of us, Jasper muttered, though there was a glint in his eye that suggested he was more confident than he let on. The remainder of the day passed in tense preparation. The brothers checked and rechecked their weapons. Owen paced the perimeter of the property, studying sight lines and potential approaches. Jasper reinforced the barn doors and cleared firing positions. Eliza cooked a simple meal of beans and salt pork, grateful for the distraction of feeding hungry men. As they ate, she found herself studying Owen. There was a quietness to him that belied his dangerous profession. He ate methodically, his movements economical, his gaze frequently drifting to the windows. He seemed perpetually alert, yet not nervous or fidgety. "How long have you been a marshal?" she asked, breaking the silence that had fallen over the table. 7 years, Owen replied. Jasper joined up 3 years ago. What made you choose that life? Owen's eyes met hers, and for a moment she glimpsed something haunted in their depths. Same thing that drives most men to pick up a badge, I reckon. Saw too much injustice and decided to do something about it. Our pa was killed by outlaws, Jasper added. Bank robbery gone wrong. Owen was just 19, I was 14. Marshall, who tracked down the killers, showed us there was a way to fight back that didn't involve becoming outlaws ourselves. Eliza thought of her own father, of Thomas. I understand that, she said softly, the need to make meaning out of loss. Owen held her gaze a moment longer than necessary, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared grief, of the way tragedy shapes a life. We should get some rest, he said finally, breaking the connection. They'll likely come at dawn when they think you'll be most vulnerable. You can take the bedroom, Eliza offered. I'll sleep out here. Owen shook his head. No, madam, you take your room. Jasper and I will take shifts keeping watch out here. Eliza didn't argue. Though the thought of sleeping in the bed she had shared with Thomas still brought pain, she recognized the practicality of the arrangement. The Marshals needed to be alert, and that meant proper rest. Wake me for the last shift, she said. I won't sleep much anyway. In her bedroom, Eliza undressed slowly, her mind churning with the events of the day. Just that morning, she had been prepared to abandon her home, to admit defeat. Now she found herself involved in a dangerous plan to capture the very men who had driven her to that decision. And then there was Owen Vance. She had noticed how his presence filled a room, how his calm confidence made her feel safer than she had in weeks. It was inappropriate, she knew, to notice such things about a man when her husband was barely in his grave. But she couldn't deny the flutter in her chest when Owen had called her by her first name, or the way his steady gaze made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced since Thomas fell ill. Stop it, she whispered to herself, slipping beneath the quilt. He's here to do a job, nothing more. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by dreams of gunfire and faceless men on horseback. When a hand gently shook her shoulder, Eliza jerked awake, a cry caught in her throat. It's just me. Owen's voice came low in the darkness. Dawn's approaching, thought you'd want to be up. Eliza nodded, her heart hammering. I'll be right out. She dressed quickly in the dim light, braiding her hair with practiced fingers. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Owen by the window, his profile outlined against the growing light. Jasper was nowhere to be seen. He's already in position in the barn, Owen explained without turning. Thought it best to get in place before full light. And you? Eliza asked, moving to stand beside him. Shouldn't you be in the root cellar soon? He turned to face her, his expression solemn. Eliza, if anything goes wrong today, don't, she interrupted. Nothing's going to go wrong. A small smile touched his lips. Hope you're right. But just in case, I want you to know there's a trap door under the rug in the pantry. Thomas showed it to me last night when I was checking the house. It leads to a small storm cellar. If things go badly, you get yourself down there and bar the door from inside. You understand? Eliza blinked in surprise. She had known nothing of a trapdoor, had never thought to look beneath the worn rug in the pantry. Thomas never mentioned it to me. He said he built it as a surprise, a safe place if raiders ever came. Didn't get a chance to show you before he fell ill. The knowledge that Thomas had been preparing for her safety even when she hadn't known, it brought tears to her eyes. It was so like him, always thinking ahead, always protecting. I'll use it if I must, she promised, but only if there's truly no other choice. Owen nodded, satisfied. That's all I ask. He glanced out the window again. Sun's coming up, I should get to my position. Remember, when you see them coming, light the lamp in the east window, then go about your business. Don't do anything to make them suspicious. I remember. He hesitated, as if wanting to say more. Instead, he reached out and briefly squeezed her hand. The touch was warm and reassuring, gone almost as quickly as it had come. Be careful, he said, and then he was gone, slipping out the back door toward the root cellar. Eliza stood alone in the kitchen, the memory of his touch lingering on her skin. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Today would determine the fate of everything she had left in the world. She would not falter now. The sun crept higher, painting the eastern sky in hues of pink and gold. Eliza forced herself to follow her normal morning routine, stoking the fire, putting on coffee, feeding the chickens that scratched in the yard. All the while, her eyes scanned the horizon, watching for the dust cloud that would signal the arrival of the Lazarus gang. It was nearly 8 o'clock when she saw it, a distant smudge against the blue sky. Riders moving fast. Her heart leapt into her throat. This was it. With hands that shook only slightly, she lit the lamp in the east window, the signal to the marshals that danger approached. Then, as instructed, she continued with her chores, hanging laundry on the line, visible from the approach to the house, but close enough to the porch that she could retreat quickly if needed. The riders grew larger, resolving into distinct figures, 6 men, as she had said. They rode in a loose formation, rifles visible across their saddles. Luther Lazarus would be at the lead, she guessed, a tall man with a black hat and a bushy beard. Eliza forced herself to continue hanging laundry, though every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to seek the safety of the trapdoor Owen had revealed. The memory of his steady presence gave her courage. She was not alone this time. The riders slowed as they approached the house, fanning out slightly in a practiced maneuver designed to prevent escape. Eliza glanced toward the barn, then the root cellar door. No sign of the marshals, which was good. They were waiting for the right moment. "Well, well," called the man in the black hat as the riders stopped about 20 yards from the house. "Looks like the widow's still here after all." Eliza straightened, clutching a damp sheet in her hands. "This is private property, Mr. Lazarus." The outlaw leader grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth beneath his beard. "Not for much longer, it ain't. Told you yesterday this land's got a new owner now. And I told you yesterday my husband's deed is legal and registered with the territorial office." Lazarus spat on the ground. "Deeds don't mean much out here, woman. Power is what matters. And right now the power is sitting on these horses." The men behind him chuckled, hands resting easily on their weapons. Eliza fought to keep her expression neutral, her eyes from darting to the hiding places where she knew Owen and Jasper waited. "I have nothing of value," she said, taking a step toward the porch. "Just the land, and you can't steal that. Can't I?" Lazarus dismounted, his spurs jangling as his boots hit the dirt. "Your husband's dead. Your father's dead. Ain't nobody to work this land but you, and what's a woman going to do with 300 acres? Better to sell it to someone who can use it proper." "I'm not selling." Lazarus's smile faded. "Wasn't asking, widow. Boys, search the house. Find whatever valuables she's got stashed. Then we'll discuss how this property changes hands." 2 of the outlaws dismounted and started toward the house. Eliza's heart pounded. Any moment now, the marshals would make their move. But what if they waited too long? What if the outlaws discovered them first? She backed up the porch steps, buying time. "There's nothing to find. Everything of value died with my husband." "We'll be the judge of that," one of the men growled, reaching for the door. It happened so fast, Eliza barely had time to register the sequence of events. A shot rang out from the barn, and one of the mounted outlaws tumbled from his saddle with a cry of surprise. Simultaneously, the root cellar door burst open, and Owen emerged, his revolver already firing. The outlaw reaching for the door fell backward, clutching his shoulder. "Marshals," Owen shouted. "Drop your weapons!" Chaos erupted. The remaining outlaws scattered, seeking cover and returning fire. Lazarus dove behind the water trough, cursing loudly. Bullets splintered wood and kicked up dust as Eliza dropped to the porch floor, crawling toward the door. Inside, she grabbed Thomas's shotgun from behind the door, her earlier promise not to fight forgotten in the heat of the moment. From her position, she could see through the window as Jasper emerged from the barn, firing steadily at the outlaws who had taken cover behind their horses. One of the gang members broke from cover, making a dash for the side of the house directly toward the window where Eliza crouched. Without thinking, she raised the shotgun and fired through the glass. The outlaw staggered, then fell face first into the dirt. Outside, the gunfire intensified. Owen had moved from the root cellar to the cover of a large oak tree, exchanging shots with Lazarus and another outlaw. Jasper was pinned down near the barn by the remaining two gang members. Eliza's hands shook as she reloaded the shotgun. The plan had worked. In a sense, they had surprised the Lazarus gang, but the outcome was far from certain. 2 outlaws were down, but 4 remained, including Luther Lazarus himself. A bullet splintered the doorframe inches from her head, and Eliza ducked instinctively. Through the broken window, she could see one of the outlaws working his way toward the back of the house. If he made it inside, she would be trapped. Decision made, Eliza moved to the kitchen and pulled back the rug in the pantry. As Owen had said, a small trapdoor was revealed. She lifted it, discovering a narrow ladder leading down into darkness. The storm cellar was little more than a hole in the ground, reinforced with timber and stocked with a few emergency supplies. But instead of climbing down, Eliza had another idea. She left the trapdoor open and returned to the front of the house, shotgun ready. If the outlaw came in through the back, he might fall through the open trapdoor. At the very least, it would provide a distraction. Outside, the gunfire had become sporadic. She could hear shouting Owen's voice calling to his brother, an outlaw's response, Lazarus's distinctive rasp ordering his men to hold position, then a cry of pain that Eliza recognized immediately. Owen. Her blood ran cold. Without thinking of the danger, she moved to the window and peered out. Owen was down, clutching his leg, his position behind the oak tree now compromised. Lazarus was advancing on him, revolver raised. No, the word tore from Eliza's throat as she raised the shotgun and fired through the broken window. The blast caught Lazarus in the side, spinning him around. He staggered but didn't fall, turning his murderous gaze toward the house. Eliza ducked as he fired, the bullet embedding itself in the wall behind her. "You're dead, woman," Lazarus roared, limping toward the porch. Eliza frantically reloaded the shotgun, knowing she wouldn't have time for another shot. The front door crashed open and she raised the weapon, prepared to fire point blank. A shot rang out, but not from her shotgun. Lazarus stopped in the doorway, a look of surprise crossing his bearded face. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, then back up at Eliza before crumpling to the floor behind him. Owen stood on the porch, his revolver still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. Blood soaked his left pant leg, but his aim had been true. "Eliza," he gasped, swaying slightly. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to form words. Owen holstered his weapon and limped into the house, collapsing into one of the kitchen chairs. Outside, the gunfire had ceased. "Jasper?" Eliza asked, finding her voice at last. "He's all right," Owen said through gritted teeth. "Got the last 2, it's over." Relief washed over her, so powerful it made her knees weak. She set the shotgun aside and moved to Owen's side, examining the wound in his thigh. The bullet had passed through the flesh, missing the bone but causing significant bleeding. "I need to stop the bleeding," she said, tearing strips from her apron. "This will hurt." Owen managed a grim smile. "Already does, madam." Eliza worked quickly, cleaning the wound with whiskey from the kitchen cabinet and binding it tightly with the strips of cloth. Owen remained stoic throughout, though sweat beaded on his forehead from the pain. Jasper appeared in the doorway, blood streaming from a cut above his eye but otherwise unharmed. "All accounted for," he reported. 4 dead, including Lazarus, 2 wounded, but they'll live to stand trial." "Good work, brother," Owen said, his voice strained. "Not bad yourself," Jasper replied, glancing at Lazarus's body still sprawled in the doorway. "Though it looks like Mrs. Edwards did her share of the fighting too." Eliza blushed. "I didn't mean to get involved, it just happened." "Good thing it did," Owen said softly, his blue eyes meeting hers. You saved my life. You saved mine first, she reminded him. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Doc Miller arrived, having heard the gunfire from town and properly tended to Owen's wound. The sheriff and his deputies finally made an appearance, taking custody of the two surviving outlaws and removing the bodies of the dead. Neighbors from nearby ranches came to offer help, having steered clear during the Lazarus Gang's reign of terror, but eager now to show solidarity. Through it all, Eliza moved with a newfound sense of purpose. The helplessness that had paralyzed her since Thomas's death had receded, replaced by a quiet determination. Her home was safe. She had helped make it so. As night fell, the house emptied of visitors, leaving only Eliza, Owen, and Jasper. Doc Miller had insisted that Owen not be moved until morning, when he would return with a wagon to transport him to town for proper recovery. Jasper had volunteered to sleep in the barn, giving Eliza and the injured Marshal privacy. "You should rest," Eliza told Owen as she changed his bandage. "You've lost a lot of blood." "I'll rest when I'm sure you're safe," he replied, watching her work with those steady blue eyes. "The danger's past," she reminded him. "Lazarus is dead, his gang is finished." "That may be, but a woman alone, I'm not as helpless as I thought," Eliza interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Today proved that. A smile touched Owen's lips. "No, you certainly aren't helpless. You're remarkable, Eliza Edwards." The compliment warmed her, but she busied herself with securing the fresh bandage to hide her reaction. "It was your plan, your courage that made the difference. I just did what needed doing." "And that," Owen said, catching her hand as she finished, "is the definition of courage." His touch sent a jolt through her, and for a moment she couldn't look away from his face. In the lamplight, his features were softer, the lines of weariness and pain smoothed away. He was handsome, she realized with a start, not in the conventional way Thomas had been with his symmetrical features and easy smile, but in a weathered, lived-in way that spoke of experiences faced and overcome. "I should let you rest," she said, gently withdrawing her hand. Owen nodded, though something in his expression suggested he was reluctant to break the connection between them. "Thank you, Eliza, for everything." As she prepared for bed in her room, Eliza found herself thinking not of the day's violence nor of her uncertain future, but of Owen Vance. Of his steady presence, his unwavering commitment to justice, the way he had looked at her with respect rather than pity. It had been a long time since a man had looked at her that way as a partner, not someone to be protected. The realization brought a pang of guilt. Thomas was barely in his grave, and here she was, noticing another man. It felt like a betrayal of his memory, of the love they had shared, brief though it had been. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the darkness, unsure if she was apologizing to Thomas or to herself. Morning brought a measure of clarity. Owen's wound was healing well, the fever that Doc Miller had feared might set in having failed to materialize. Jasper had ridden into town at dawn to send telegrams reporting the demise of the Lazarus Gang and to arrange transportation for his brother. Eliza found Owen sitting on the porch when she brought him coffee, his injured leg propped on a stool, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Beautiful country," he remarked as she sat beside him. "I can see why you fought to keep it." "It's all I have left," she said simply. "Of my family, of Thomas." Owen was quiet for a moment, sipping his coffee. "What will you do now?" It was the question she had been asking herself since the gunfire ceased. Before yesterday, the answer had seemed clear: sell what she could and leave. But now. "I think I'll stay," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Find a way to work the land, maybe hire help for the heavier tasks. It won't be easy. Few worthwhile things are." Owen smiled at that, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his face. True enough. They sat in companionable silence, watching as the morning sun burned away the last wisps of fog clinging to the valley. In the distance, Eliza could see dust rising, Doc Miller's wagon approaching, she guessed. "I suppose you'll be leaving today," she said, trying to keep her tone neutral. Owen nodded. "Need to get these prisoners to Prescott for trial, and then—" He hesitated. "And then there's always another outlaw, another job, the life of a marshal. It's all I've known for 7 years." There was a note in his voice she hadn't heard before, weariness, perhaps, or uncertainty. "Do you ever think of doing something else?" Eliza asked, watching his profile. Owen considered the question. Sometimes, a man can only chase death for so long before it starts to hollow him out. The admission seemed to cost him something, as if he rarely allowed himself such candor. Eliza felt honored by his trust and emboldened by it. "What would you do if not this?" He laughed softly. "Funny you should ask. I've been thinking about that very thing lately. Maybe find a piece of land, raise some cattle, live by the seasons instead of by the next warrant. Sounds peaceful. It does, doesn't it?" He turned to look at her then, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "Eliza, wagon coming." Jasper's voice called from the barn, interrupting whatever Owen had been about to say. The moment broken, Owen straightened in his chair, his marshal's demeanor sliding back into place like a familiar coat. Eliza felt a pang of disappointment, though she couldn't have said exactly what she had been hoping to hear. Doc Miller's arrival brought a flurry of activity. The doctor examined Owen's wound, pronounced it healing well, and helped him into the wagon. Jasper loaded their few belongings and secured their horses to the back of the vehicle. Standing on the porch, Eliza felt a strange hollowness in her chest as she watched the preparations. These men had entered her life less than 48 hours ago, yet their departure left her feeling bereft in a way she hadn't anticipated. "I can't thank you enough," she said as Owen prepared to leave. "Both of you. You saved my home, possibly my life. And you saved mine," Owen reminded her. "I'd say we're even." But they weren't even, not really. Owen and Jasper would ride away, continue their lives as before. Eliza would remain, facing an uncertain future alone once more. The thought sent a cold fear through her that she tried to suppress. "If you're ever passing through Cottonwood Springs again," she offered, "you'll always have a place to stay." Jasper tipped his hat. "Mighty kind of you, madam." Owen's eyes held hers for a long moment. "I may take you up on that sooner than you think." Before she could ask what he meant, he reached out and took her hand. To her surprise, he raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned, courtly, and it sent a rush of warmth through her that had nothing to do with the morning sun. "Until we meet again, Eliza Edwards," he said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. And then he was gone, climbing into the wagon with Doc Miller's help. Jasper mounted his horse, and with a final wave they were off, the wagon creaking down the dusty road toward town. Eliza stood on the porch long after they had disappeared from sight, her hand still tingling from Owen's kiss. A part of her, a part she had thought died with Thomas, had awakened at his touch, stirring feelings she wasn't ready to name. "Foolishness," she muttered to herself, turning back to the house. There was work to be done, a life to rebuild. No time for fanciful thoughts about a man whose life was spent in constant motion, always chasing the next horizon. Yet as the days passed, she found herself watching the road more often than necessary, pausing in her chores to scan the distance for a familiar figure. 2 weeks after the shootout, she received word that the surviving members of the Lazarus gang had been formally charged in Prescott. The territorial newspaper praised the Vance brothers for their bravery and tenacity in bringing the notorious outlaws to justice. Of Owen himself, there was no word. Life settled into a new rhythm. True to her word, Eliza hired help, a young married couple from town who were eager for work and willing to live in the small cabin at the edge of the property. With their assistance, she managed to keep the ranch functioning, even turning a modest profit when they drove the cattle to market in the fall. As winter approached, Eliza found herself more settled in her solitude. The acute grief of Thomas's death had softened to a gentle ache, a presence she carried with her rather than a weight that threatened to crush her. She thought of Owen Vance, occasionally wondering where his duties had taken him, whether his wound had healed completely, if he ever thought of her. But these thoughts came less frequently as the months passed, relegated to the quiet hours before sleep claimed her. It was a bitter December morning when she heard hoofbeats approaching the house. Snow had fallen the night before, unusual for the area, blanketing the landscape in pristine white. Eliza had been baking bread, enjoying the simple pleasure of kneading dough with hands chapped from the cold. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window, her heart quickening despite her best efforts to remain calm. A lone rider approached, his broad-shouldered silhouette familiar even at a distance. Owen, he rode slowly, his breath and his horses visible in the cold air. As he drew closer, she could see that he wore a heavy coat against the winter chill, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He looked tired, as if he had been riding for days. Eliza opened the door before he could knock, standing on the threshold as he dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post. "Marshal Vance," she said, striving for a casual tone though her pulse raced. "This is a surprise." He removed his hat, revealing hair that had grown longer since she'd last seen him. "Not Marshal anymore," he corrected, a small smile playing at his lips. "Just Owen now." Eliza blinked, processing this information. "You resigned your position, turned in my badge last month." He stomped his boots to clear them of snow before approaching the porch. "Thought it was time for a change." "I see." She stepped aside to let him enter. "Come in before you freeze." Inside, the warmth of the kitchen enveloped them. Owen stood awkwardly in the center of the room, hat in hand, as if uncertain of his welcome now that he was here. "Coffee," Eliza offered, moving to the stove to hide the flush she could feel creeping up her neck. "Please." She busied herself with the coffee pot, aware of his eyes following her movements. When she could delay no longer, she turned to face him, two steaming cups in hand. "What brings you to Cottonwood Springs in the dead of winter, Owen?" she asked, setting his cup before him at the table. He sat, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "You, Eliza," the simple answer stole her breath. She sank into the chair across from him, unable to look away from his face. He looked different somehow. The constant vigilance that had marked his features before had eased, replaced by a calm certainty. "Me," she echoed. "I couldn't stop thinking about you," he admitted. "About the way you stood your ground when most would have run, about your courage, your determination." He paused, taking a breath. "About the promise of a home I felt here, however briefly." Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. "I thought perhaps you had forgotten." "Not for a single day." His blue eyes held hers, earnest and unwavering. "I wanted to come back sooner, but I had obligations to fulfill. Prisoners to deliver, reports to file, and I needed to be sure." "Sure of what?" "That what I felt wasn't just gratitude or the bond that forms between people who have faced death together." He set down his coffee cup. "I've had 6 months to think about it, Eliza, to consider what I want for the rest of my life, and the answer keeps coming back to this place, to you." Eliza sat very still, afraid that any movement might shatter the moment. "Owen, I know it's sudden," he interrupted. "I know you're still grieving Thomas. I'm not asking for promises or commitments, just a chance to prove myself worthy of your consideration." "Worthy," she repeated, finding her voice at last. "Owen, you saved my life, my home. If anyone has proven their worth, it's you." He shook his head. "That was duty. What I'm talking about now is something else entirely." Understanding dawned. "You want to court me?" A smile touched his lips. "If you'll allow it, I've purchased land about 10 miles east of here. Good grazing land with a stream running through it. I plan to build a house come spring, start raising cattle like I talked about." The image his words conjured, Owen settling nearby, becoming a part of her world, sent a flutter of hope through Eliza's chest. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to hope for anything beyond mere survival. "And Jasper?" she asked, buying time to collect her thoughts. "Took a position as deputy in Tucson, says towns agree with him better than the open range." Owen leaned forward slightly. "Eliza, I know this is unexpected. I'll understand if you need time or if your answer is no, but I had to try." In the silence that followed, Eliza found herself at a crossroads. Before her lay 2 paths continuing alone, independent but isolated, or opening herself to the possibility of companionship, of love with this man who had already proved his character in the crucible of danger. Thomas would want her to be happy, she knew. Her father, too. They had loved her too well to wish her a life of solitude. "I think," she said slowly, "that I would like very much for you to court me, Owen Vance." The joy that transformed his face was answer enough to any doubts that lingered in her heart. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers, warm and solid and real. "I'll do right by you, Eliza. That's a promise." "I believe you," she said, and found that she did. Owen stayed for dinner, and they talked for hours as the winter day faded to twilight. He told her of his plans for his land, of the cattle breed he hoped to raise, of the house he envisioned building a solid, two-story structure with wide porches and many windows. Eliza shared her experiences of the past months, the challenges she had overcome, the lessons she had learned about her own resilience. When he finally rose to leave, promising to return the following day, Eliza walked him to the door. In the soft glow of the lamplight, he seemed reluctant to depart, lingering on the threshold. "Eliza," he said, his voice low, "I've thought about this moment for 6 months, about what I would say to you if I ever got the chance, and now that I'm here, words seem inadequate." She looked up at him, at the earnestness in his blue eyes, the strength in his weathered face. "Then perhaps," she suggested softly, "we don't need words." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, followed by a warmth that made her breath catch. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, he leaned down. His lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it was barely there, a question rather than a demand. Eliza answered by stepping closer, her hand coming to rest on his chest. The kiss deepened, becoming something more, a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, she felt as if something long dormant within her had awakened, unfurling like the first green shoots after a long winter. "Until tomorrow," Owen whispered, touching her cheek once before stepping back. "Until tomorrow," she echoed, watching as he mounted his horse and rode into the gathering darkness. Standing in the doorway of the home she had nearly abandoned, Eliza felt the future expanding before her, bright with possibilities she had thought forever lost. 6 months ago, she had believed her story was finished, that all that remained was an epilogue of solitude and survival, but life, it seemed, had other plans. And with Owen's kiss, a new chapter had begun. The winter passed in a rhythm of courtship as old as time itself. Owen rode out to Eliza's ranch every few days, sometimes staying to help with chores, other times taking her for rides across the snow-covered landscape. They shared meals and conversations, gradually revealing the layers of their lives to each other. Eliza learned that Owen had grown up in Missouri, the son of a blacksmith who had taught him the value of hard work and integrity. She told him of her childhood in Cottonwood Springs, of her mother's early death, and her father's determined efforts to raise her to be both strong and compassionate. With each visit, the connection between them deepened. Owen was patient, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. He understood the complicated nature of grief, how it ebbed and flowed like a tide, some days receding enough to allow joy, other days washing over her anew. By spring, when the first wildflowers began to dot the rangeland, Eliza found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and frightened her. The guilt she had initially felt at opening her heart to another man had gradually eased, replaced by the certainty that Thomas would have wanted her happiness above all else. On a warm April evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Owen took her hand in his. "Construction starts on the house next week," he said. "I've hired men from town and Jasper's coming up from Tucson to help." "That's wonderful," Eliza replied, genuinely pleased. "Will you show me the plans?" Owen nodded, reaching into his vest pocket and extracting a folded paper. As he opened it, revealing a detailed sketch of a handsome 2-story home, Eliza noticed his hands were unusually unsteady. "It's beautiful," she said, studying the drawing. "You've thought of everything?" "Almost everything." Owen's voice had a strange quality to it, a tension she hadn't heard before. "There's one detail I couldn't decide on without consulting you." Eliza looked up, puzzled. "What's that?" He took a deep breath. Whether to build 1 bedroom or 2, the implication of his words registered slowly and then all at once. Eliza's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead, pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Owen," she breathed, unable to form a more coherent response. He shifted in his chair to face her directly, still holding her hand in his. "Eliza Edwards, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, your strength, your kindness, your determination has made me certain of what I suspected that first day, that you are the woman I want to share my life with." Tears welled in Eliza's eyes as Owen slid from his chair to one knee before her, his weathered face solemn and hopeful all at once. "I love you, Eliza. I think I've loved you since I saw you standing on this porch with that shotgun, refusing to be driven from your home. I know it hasn't been very long, and if you need more time, I'll wait, but I wanted you to know where my heart stands." The tears spilled over, trailing down Eliza's cheeks. "Oh, Owen," alarm crossed his features. "I've upset you." "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have no," she interrupted, squeezing his hand. "No, you haven't upset me. I'm crying because I'm happy, because I love you too." The words, once spoken, seemed to liberate something within her, a final barrier she hadn't realized she was still maintaining. Owen's expression transformed, joy replacing uncertainty as he rose and pulled her to her feet. "Does that mean?" Eliza nodded, a smile breaking through her tears. "Yes, Owen Vance, one bedroom will be sufficient." His answering smile was brilliant as he wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that expressed what words could not. When he set her down, he framed her face with his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "You've made me the happiest man in the territory," he said before lowering his lips to hers. The kiss was different from their others, deeper, filled with promise and the certainty of a shared future. Eliza melted into it, her arms encircling his neck, her body fitting against his as if they had been carved from the same stone. When they finally parted, breathless and laughing, Owen reached into his pocket again. "I have something for you," he said, retrieving a small object. In his palm lay a ring, a simple gold band set with a single, perfect pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "My father gave it to me before he died, said I should give it to the woman who captured my heart the way she captured his." Eliza extended her trembling hand, watching as Owen slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the pearl gleaming softly in the fading light. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I'll treasure it always." "As I'll treasure you," he replied, kissing her again. They were married in June, in a ceremony held in the garden behind Eliza's house. Jasper stood as Owen's best man, while Doc Miller gave the bride away. Half the town turned out to witness the union, many of them still marveling at the unlikely romance that had blossomed from the ashes of tragedy. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and celebrated, Eliza and Owen slipped away for a moment alone. They stood in the shade of the old oak tree where Owen had been wounded during the shootout with the Lazarus gang, now decorated with ribbons and flowers for the wedding. "Are you happy, Mrs. Vance?" Owen asked, his arms encircling her waist. Eliza smiled up at her husband, marveling at how right it felt to hear herself addressed that way. "Happier than I ever thought possible, even though I'm stealing you away from your home." The house Owen had built was finally complete, waiting for them to take up residence after a brief honeymoon in Prescott. "You're not stealing me," Eliza corrected, resting her head against his chest. "You're taking me to our home. Besides, we're keeping this place too. The Mitchells will manage it well." The young couple who had helped Eliza run the ranch had agreed to stay on as managers, living in the main house and sending half the profits to the Vances. It was an arrangement that satisfied everyone. Eliza maintained her connection to her family's legacy, while the Mitchells gained an opportunity they could never have afforded otherwise. "You know," Owen said thoughtfully, "a year ago, if someone had told me I'd be standing here as your husband, I would have called them crazy. I was so certain my life would always be on the move, chasing the next outlaw. And I was certain my story had ended when Thomas died," Eliza replied. "That all that remained was to survive each day as it came." Owen tightened his arms around her. "I'm grateful every day that we were both wrong." Eliza tilted her face up to his. "As am I." Their kiss was interrupted by Jasper's voice calling for them to rejoin the celebration. Hand in hand, they returned to their guests, to the music and laughter that marked the beginning of their shared life. Later that night, as they prepared to depart for Prescott, Eliza paused on the porch of the house that had seen so much joy and sorrow. Owen came to stand beside her, sensing her need for a moment of reflection. "We'll be back," he reminded her gently. "This place will always be part of us." Eliza nodded, taking his hand. "I know, it's just, I never thought I'd find love again, Owen." Never thought I'd have a second chance at happiness. Life has a way of surprising us, he said, lifting her hand to his lips. And I plan to spend the rest of mine making sure you never regret taking that chance with me. As they rode away from the ranch, toward the future they would build together, Eliza looked back once at the house silhouetted against the evening sky. For so long, it had represented all she had left in the world. Now it was simply one chapter in a story that continued to unfold, a story of love found in the most unexpected circumstances, of healing that came not from forgetting the past, but from embracing the possibility of tomorrow. And as the ranch faded from view, Eliza turned her gaze forward, toward the man who rode beside her and the life they would create together, a life she had once thought impossible, opened by a single kiss from a marshal who had become a rancher, and then her husband. The years that followed brought changes and challenges, joys and sorrows, as all lives do. The ranch Owen built flourished under their joint care, eventually becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. They added a wing to the house when their first child, a daughter they named Margaret after Owen's mother, arrived in the spring of their second year of marriage. A son followed 2 years later, named Thomas in honor of Eliza's first husband, a gesture from Owen that had moved her to tears when he suggested it. "He was part of making you the woman I love," Owen had said simply. "He deserves to be remembered." As the children grew, so did the Vance legacy in Cottonwood Springs. Owen's fair dealings and steadfast character earned him the respect of everyone from the wealthiest ranchers to the humblest cowboys. When Arizona became a state in 1912, he was among those chosen to help draft the Constitution, his practical wisdom and commitment to justice serving him well in this new arena. Eliza, meanwhile, became known for her generosity and compassion. She established a fund to assist widows and orphans in the territory, remembering all too well how close she had come to losing everything. The small library she founded in town bore her name, a testament to her belief that education was the surest path to a better future. Through it all, their love remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. There were arguments, of course, and difficult times, the drought of '92 that nearly ruined them. The winter Margaret fell ill with pneumonia, and they feared they would lose her. The political tensions that occasionally threatened to divide the community. But each evening, no matter what challenges the day had brought, Owen and Eliza would sit together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the land they both loved. It became a ritual, a daily reminder of what mattered most, the life they had built together, against all odds. On their 30th anniversary, as they sat in their accustomed places, gray now threading through both their hair, Owen reached for Eliza's hand. The pearl ring he had given her still adorned her finger, though the gold had worn thin with the passing years. "Any regrets?" he asked, a question he posed every year on this day, and Eliza, as she always did, shook her head and smiled. Not a single one, for she had learned, on that fateful day when a wounded marshal had kissed her hand and promised to return, that endings were often just disguised beginnings. That a heart, once broken, could mend stronger than before. That love, when it was true, was worth every risk. And that sometimes, when you thought your story was finished, all it took was a kiss to open a new chapter more beautiful than you could have imagined.